Hi, dear. Welcome to this English listening practice. Today, I will share with you a story about friendship. This story is about two travelers, strangers at first, who meet by chance and begin a journey together. Through storms, through struggles, and through choices, they discover what true friendship means. So sit back, relax, and listen carefully. Let the words carry you, and let the story begin. The road stretched through the countryside like a thin line drawn by an unseen hand. It was not a smooth road. It was a dirt path, uneven, cracked by heat in summer and softened by rain in winter. Along its sides, tall grass leaned in the wind, and the sound of insects filled the silence. On this road, in the late hours of the afternoon, two travelers walked. They did not walk together. At first, they were strangers, each carrying his own bundle, each watching his own steps. But fate often brings lives closer in quiet ways, and that afternoon was such a time. The first traveler was young, perhaps no more than 20. His clothes were simple, his shoes worn. He carried little with him, only a bag tied with rope and a small flask of water. His eyes were alert, filled with curiosity, but also with a hint of worry, as if he had not yet learned where he truly belonged. The second traveler was older. His beard showed the color of gray, his hands carried the marks of labor, his back bent slightly with the weight of years. He walked with steady steps, not fast, not slow, but measured. On his shoulder hung a heavier pack, and in his eyes lived the patience of someone who had seen more than a few hard roads. For a time, they remained apart. One walked ahead, the other behind. They heard each other's footsteps but did not speak. The silence between them was not unfriendly. It was simply the silence of strangers who had not yet found a reason to share words. As the sun sank lower, the air grew cooler, and a wind began to rise. The grass bent harder now, and dust lifted from the path, swirling around their legs. Dark clouds were gathering at the horizon, promising rain before the night. The younger traveler looked up and frowned. Rain meant trouble. Wet clothes, cold nights, a fire that refused to start. The older traveler saw the same sky but did not frown. He had walked under many storms. He knew the signs, the smell of damp air, the way the birds flew lower when heavy weather was near. Before long, the first drops began to fall. They struck the dry dust of the road, leaving dark spots behind. Then came more drops, faster, heavier, until the sound of falling rain covered everything else. The road turned soft under their feet, and puddles began to form. There was no shelter nearby. Only trees stood scattered in the distance, too thin to offer real cover. The younger traveler looked around quickly, searching, uneasy. The older traveler slowed his steps, lifted his face to the sky, and accepted the rain without panic. It was then, in that moment of shared discomfort, that their distance began to close. The younger one moved closer, not out of courage, but out of need. He noticed the older man's calmness, the way he did not hurry or complain. Somehow, that steadiness felt safer than the loneliness of walking alone. And so, without a word, they began to walk side by side. Two strangers, each with his own story, now sharing the same road in the same storm. The rain did not stop quickly. It poured, filling the ditches, soaking their clothes, weighing down their steps. The sky grew darker, though it was not yet night, and thunder rolled far away, low and heavy. Their silence continued, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of strangers keeping distance, but the silence of people enduring the same hardship together. In that silence, A kind of understanding was born. Not friendship yet, not even trust, but the first thread of connection. By the time the rain softened into a drizzle, both men were wet and tired. The dirt road had become mud, sticking to their shoes. But they kept walking, step by step, side by side. Neither spoke, but each knew. The journey had changed. They were no longer alone. They were no longer just two travelers on the same road. They were two lives beginning to move together, bound by chance, by weather, and by the long path ahead. The rain had passed, but the road did not forget it. The dirt beneath their feet was no longer solid. Every step pressed deep into the ground, pulling at their shoes, clinging like a weight that refused to let go. The countryside was quiet again, but it was the heavy quietness that follows a storm. The kind of silence that holds the smell of wet earth and broken branches. The two travelers walked on. They had not exchanged words, yet their steps now matched in rhythm, as if the storm had tied them together. The younger one, tired from the struggle, glanced at the older man. The older man's face was calm, his breathing steady, his eyes focused ahead. Strength radiated not from his body but from his patience, a quiet endurance that did not break under difficulty. The younger one's shoulders ached. The bag on his back felt heavier with each mile, and the damp cloth of his clothes rubbed against his skin. He wanted to stop, but the sight of the older man continuing with quiet determination gave him the will to go on. In that moment, he realized something important. Sometimes strength is not loud. Sometimes it is simply the refusal to stop. Evening fell. The light faded into gray, and with it came the chill of night. The field stretched wide on either side, dotted with dark trees, their leaves dripping with leftover rain. No houses, no fires, no sign of shelter. It was clear that they would spend the night in the open. They found a patch of dry ground beneath a group of tall trees. It was not much, but it was enough to sit and rest their tired legs. The younger one fumbled with flint and damp sticks, trying to make a fire. The sparks hissed, the smoke rose, but the wood refused to catch. Again and again he tried, frustration rising with every failed attempt. The older man watched for a time, then bent down slowly, choosing smaller twigs, peeling bark with his knife, arranging the pieces with patience. His hands were rough but steady, moving with the quiet knowledge of someone who had done this many times before. Soon a thin flame appeared, fragile at first, then stronger, until firelight spread across their small camp. The warmth touched their faces. The light pushed back the shadows. The smoke carried the smell of pine and ash. For the first time that day, the younger traveler felt relief. He stretched his hands toward the fire and closed his eyes, letting the heat chase away the dampness. Food was simple. Hard bread, a little dried meat, a swallow of water from their flasks. They ate in silence, but it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two men sharing the same fire, the same food, the same night. It was the silence that friendship sometimes chooses instead of words. When darkness thickened and the stars appeared, they lay down on the ground, using their packs as pillows. The younger one stared at the sky, where countless stars glimmered like grains of salt scattered across black cloth. The sound of the river in the distance mixed with the crackle of the fire. He felt a kind of safety he had not expected. Safety not from the fire, but from the simple presence of another person. Loneliness had been a familiar companion on his journey, but tonight it stepped aside. The next morning the struggle continued. The rain had softened the earth, and the road ahead was harder than before. Slopes turned slippery, streams overflowed, and the sun, instead of drying the path, rose hot and merciless, pulling the strength from their bodies. At one point, the younger traveler slipped on a muddy incline. He landed hard, scraping his arm, his pack sliding from his shoulder. For a moment he lay there, the will to rise fading beneath the weight of exhaustion. Then he felt a strong hand pull him up. The older man said nothing, but his grip was firm, steady, unshakable. The younger one stood again, weak but grateful, and they continued. By midday, hunger returned. They had little food left. The younger one divided what he had, breaking his bread in half, sharing without hesitation. The older man accepted quietly, nodding once, and together they chewed the hard crust, swallowing slowly, making the small meal last. It was in these shared struggles, mud, hunger, fire, and fatigue, that something invisible began to grow. They had not spoken, yet they had begun to trust. Trust built not from words, but from actions. Trust built from the knowledge that when one stumbled, the other remained, that when the night was cold, they sat by the same fire, that when the bread was scarce, it was divided into 2 equal parts. Friendship often begins not in comfort, but in hardship. It is not born in laughter, but in shared silence. It is not proven in promises, but in simple acts that say, "You are not alone." And so on that long and difficult road, 2 strangers took their first true steps toward becoming friends. The road grew narrower as the days passed. The wide fields gave way to rising hills, and the soft mud hardened into rocky paths. Trees grew taller and denser, blocking much of the sunlight. The air was cooler here, but it carried a weight, a stillness that made each sound sharper. The crack of a twig, the call of a crow, the rush of wind through branches. The 2 travelers walked on side by side. Their clothes were worn, their steps heavy, but their rhythm had become steady. What began as coincidence had grown into something like companionship. Yet companionship is not the same as trust, and trust, as life often proves, must be tested. One afternoon, the path led them into a deep forest. The trees were so thick that the daylight dimmed, turning afternoon into something like dusk. The road disappeared beneath fallen leaves, and the air smelled of damp earth and moss. It was easy to lose direction here. The younger traveler looked around uneasily, his eyes darting from one shadow to another. The older man, though calm, moved slower now, cautious with every step. Hours passed, but the forest did not end. The road had vanished completely, leaving them with nothing but instinct. The younger one began to feel the pressure of silence, the kind of silence that grows heavier with every moment of uncertainty. His mind whispered doubts. What if we are lost? What if we never find our way out? Night fell quickly beneath the thick canopy. The fire they made was small, barely enough to chase away the dark. Every rustle in the distance sounded like a threat. The younger traveler found it hard to sleep, while the older one lay quietly conserving strength. Trust in that moment was fragile. The younger one wondered if he had chosen the right companion, if following this man would lead him out or deeper into the forest. The next morning brought no relief. The forest stretched endlessly, paths twisted and doubled back, and hunger began to gnaw at their patience. Their water flasks were almost empty. The younger traveler stumbled more often, his steps less sure. Once, he slipped on wet moss and nearly fell down a steep incline. The older man caught him by the arm, pulling him back just in time. It was a small moment, but in that moment, something shifted. For the younger one, fear was replaced with gratitude. For the older one, patience turned into quiet responsibility. But the true test came later that day. They reached a river cutting through the forest. The water was not wide, but it was fast, swollen by the storm that had passed days before. Its surface was broken by white foam, and its roar filled the air, drowning out every other sound. There was no bridge, no boat, only the rushing water between them and the path ahead. The younger traveler froze at the edge. His legs felt weak, his mind filled with images of being pulled under, carried away. The river seemed alive, like a beast waiting to swallow him whole. The older man studied the current, the slippery stones beneath the surface, the strength of the flow. He stepped carefully into the water, testing each stone before moving forward. Slowly, steadily he crossed until he reached the other side. Then he turned. Waiting, the younger one's fear grew stronger. The thought of stepping into the current made his chest tighten. For a long moment he stood still, unable to move. But then he saw the older man's face, not impatient, not angry, but steady, waiting, trusting. And in that gaze, he found courage. Step by step, he entered the water. The current pushed hard against his legs, forcing him to fight for balance. Every stone was slippery, every step uncertain. Halfway across, his foot slipped, and he fell to his knees, the river rushing around him. Panic rose like fire in his chest. But before the current could pull him away, the older man waded back into the water, grasped his arm, and pulled him upright. Together they moved, step by step, until they reached the far bank, breathless but safe. The younger traveler collapsed on the grass, his body trembling. The older one sat beside him, silent, letting him breathe. No words were spoken, but in that silence, trust was sealed. The river had tested them both. The younger one had discovered his own weakness, but also his own strength. The older one had shown not just patience, but loyalty. The kind of loyalty that does not leave another behind. That night, as they rested once again beneath the dark trees, the firelight flickering across their tired faces, something new settled between them. It was no longer just companionship, no longer just shared struggle. It was trust, strong and unspoken, born in danger and proven in survival. Friendship often begins quietly with small acts of kindness. But true friendship is tested in fear, in risk, in the moments when walking away is easier than staying. And here, on this long road through the forest, two travelers had faced that test and passed. The forest finally thinned, and the road returned, if it could still be called a road. It was more like a trail now, pressed into the earth by the feet of travelers long before them. The air grew lighter, the sky brighter, and beyond the trees stretched a wide valley, open and quiet. For the first time in days, the two travelers could see far ahead. They stood on a rise overlooking the valley floor. The land below was divided by winding paths, some leading left, some leading right, each vanishing into the distance. One path curved toward the mountains, their sharp peaks shining with snow. The other path bent toward rolling plains, where the horizon melted into the sky. The choice was clear and heavy at once. The younger traveler knew the plains were his way. His journey was meant to end beyond the fields, in a place where work and opportunity waited. The older traveler knew the mountains were his way. Somewhere among the peaks was a village he longed to return to, a place of memory, perhaps of family. The crossroad had arrived. After miles of rain and mud, after nights of fire and hunger, after rivers and forests, the road had brought them to this moment, 2 different paths, 2 different destinies. For a long while they stood in silence, looking at the valley. The younger one felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. If he turned toward the plains, he would reach his destination faster, lighter, with fewer delays. If he turned toward the mountains, he would walk a road not meant for him, longer, harder, but never alone. Friendship is simple when the road is the same. It becomes real only when the road divides. The younger one remembered the fire on the cold night, the hand that pulled him from the mud, the steady arm that saved him in the river. He remembered the silence that was no longer heavy, the meals that were divided in 2, the trust that had been built in shadows and storms. Could he now walk away, chasing only his own comfort? Could he break the bond that had carried him this far? The older one, too, felt the question. He could walk into the mountains alone, faster, with lighter steps. Yet something in him hesitated. He had walked many roads in his life, many miles in solitude. But this companionship, though brief, had become rare, almost precious. In the younger one's energy, he had seen hope. In his persistence, he had seen courage. The thought of losing that presence, even for the right road, felt strangely like loss. The valley waited, silent, as if it too listened for their decision. The wind moved gently across the tall grass, carrying no answer, only the whisper of possibilities. And then slowly the choice was made. They did not speak it aloud, but they turned their feet in the same direction. Not toward the plains, not toward the mountains, but toward each other. For the road of friendship is not about speed, nor about ease. It is about walking together. The new path was not shorter, it was not easier. It bent away from both destinations, winding through the valley before climbing again. But in choosing it, they chose something greater than a rival. They chose the journey itself. Their steps fell into rhythm again, steady and sure. The valley stretched wide around them, the horizon glowing with the golden light of late afternoon. For the first time, they felt not just like companions, not just like survivors of storms and rivers, but like true friends, bound not by need, but by choice. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky with fire and gold, their shadows stretched long behind them, 2 lines moving side by side, refusing to part. And in those shadows lived a promise unspoken. We walk together wherever the road may lead. The valley road stretched farther than either man expected. Days passed, and still the path bent and twisted, leading them through fields of tall grass, across small streams, and over rolling hills. The air grew warmer, the sun higher, and each evening the sky burned with the colors of fire before fading into deep night. By now, their rhythm was unshakable. Every step seemed guided by an invisible cord that bound them together. They no longer thought of walking alone. They no longer imagined reaching their destinations quickly. For in walking side by side, the journey itself had become the destination. But no road lasts forever, and friendship, no matter how deep, must face the moment of parting. It came one morning, quiet and sudden. They reached another crossroads. This time the paths did not bend together but split sharply apart. One stretched toward distant fields where the land promised work and new beginnings. The other rose toward the mountains, sharp and strong against the horizon, leading back to the life that had been waiting. There was no way to continue without choosing. No hidden trail, no gentle bend that allowed them to walk as one. The road itself demanded separation. The younger one stood still, staring at the fields. He thought of the future, of the labor that awaited, of the chance to build something new. The older one looked at the mountains, at the peaks that held his memories, his reasons for coming this far. Between them stretched silence, but it was not heavy silence. It was the silence of understanding, of two hearts that already knew what must happen. Parting is never easy. But true friendship does not beg, does not bind, does not chain. It gives and it lets go. They rested for a while at the crossroad, sharing their last piece of bread, drinking the final drops of water from their flasks. The sun rose slowly, its light falling on both paths, as if blessing them equally. When at last they rose to leave, there were no grand promises, no dramatic words, only a simple truth carried in their steps. They had walked together, and that was enough. The younger one turned toward the plains, his figure soon blending with the waving grass. The older one began the climb toward the mountains, his shadow long and steady against the rocks. And though the distance between them grew, though their shapes grew smaller in each other's eyes, the bond they carried did not fade. For friendship does not live in the nearness of feet, but in the memory of hearts. It does not depend on daily words, but on shared struggles that remain forever. The fire they built in the rain, the river they crossed together, the choice they made to walk side by side, these things would never be erased. Years might pass, leaves might change, but somewhere in both their stories, the road they shared would remain, shining quietly like a hidden star in the night. And so the journey ended, not with celebration, but with something deeper. A mark left upon two souls, a reminder that even a brief crossing of paths can become eternal. True friendship does not always stay, but when it is real, it leaves you forever marked. A story about friendship reminds us that true friends are found in struggle, in trust, and in the choices we make together. I hope this story helped you practice your English listening and also gave you something warm to carry in your heart. Friendship may not always stay close, but real friendship is never forgotten. Thank you, my dear friend, for listening. See you again in the next story.